There's this chapter in my book, which is chapter 29. It's called "This Is a War." And I did an entire audio of the scripture of the entire audio of the scriptures first and foremost, which to me is one of the most important things I've ever done, to listen to, like you said, the word just continually. But I also put out an entire audio of my book as well, which is all this is free for download for those of you guys that want access to it. You can go to snatchfromtheflames.com. You can get name your own price, whatever you guys want. I'm not here to merchandise people. I just want to equip people with understanding. And there's a chapter in there that's called "This Is a War." And it is that chapter that I would encourage people to read for themselves, because I go into a lot more detail about exactly how to contend with a lot of these experiences like Billy is talking about here. And on one side of the equation, you got to understand there is a battlefield that we are in. Like you cannot separate your mind from an understanding that we are in an absolute fight for our lives against a very brilliant, well-equipped, well-financed, well-endeavored and motivated enemy. And because of that, they have had a tremendous amount of time to do what is called human terrain mapping. They have been able to do something that is to prepare a force of invaders against those who are in maybe the highest threat matrix that they would have, those that are their greatest adversaries. And I try to explain to people that the dragon and his adversary and his lesser spirits, right? The devil, like we talk about, whether it's Mastema or some of these names that he's been given over time in antiquity, Gadriel and some of these other names of the fallen ones. There are these fallen angels that rebelled, and they came down in the days of Jared, and they mingled with women, and they revealed secrets to mankind. And they were the gods of old, these ancient mighty ones that people worship. They're real physiological creatures. This is not some abstract mythological reality. These are the very named adversaries who are working diligently to conspire, like it says in Psalms 2 and Psalms 82, against the sons of men who pervert justice, who persecute the poor, who oppress the sojourner, who do not give right ruling. Instead, it says that their judgment has been determined from of old, like in the book of Jude. And you know what? They have been kept and bound in chains of darkness under Tartarus, which is in the bowels of the earth, a prison cell, that they were judged for teaching mankind these secret knowledge. And part of that secret knowledge is things with which people were shown how to go into the spiritual realm. Oftentimes today, we have this phrase called astral projection, where people are separating their spirit man and going into the ether, the spiritual planes. And this is the land where that's what we would call the second heaven, right? This realm between the Most High and his kingdom and ours down here. And that realm has been sealed off to us for a reason, visibly, right? But what happens is people who are trained in these arts, like when you are dealing with someone who's like a warlock or somebody that's really a well-trained witch, is more than capable of understanding their assignments. And I shared with you, Billy, an example of someone who got caught up in this, who was not born into it like I was. But there was a guy in Asheville, North Carolina, who I met who had been homeless, and somebody had taken him in. Amazing believers had taken him in and hosted him, given him a house or a converted schoolie to stay in. And he was literally parked directly in front of my windshield of my RV. And what I did not know about this guy when I first got to know him is that this guy had been recruited by the Occult, a specific coven in Asheville, which I'm not going to name right now. But that coven that was operating out of Asheville had a congregation that would get together, like you and I would call church. They would sit down together, and they had a board of directors of their own hierarchical names who would sit down and decide where are the greatest threats in the community. What are the greatest threats? And threats, I mean the resistance to the ways of darkness, the places that are not allowing the agenda of the radical destruction of biblical morality, family, spirituality, the ones who are targeting people for destruction. And they would send specific individuals on assignment against those people. And most often they targeted pastors' wives, their children, and those who were in positions of maintenance inside of churches. And they would do this because they wanted to gain access. They wanted access to power, and they would do that by making themselves the greatest volunteer there was. And so they would come into churches under the ruse, under the guise of being a normal Christian, being a normal believer, and who knew all the language, who knew all the lingo. And at the same time, inwardly, these were the wolves masquerading in sheep's clothing that we've been warned about. And most pastors, most people who go to a church are blind, ignorant, and dumb to the ways of darkness. And because of that lack of knowledge, they are perishing. And the enemy has no requirement to inform his adversaries of the rules of engagement. It's been clearly written here in the scriptures. We have an ROE. Most people don't know about the authority that's been given to them, and so they don't walk in it. And so they would go into these churches and they would start to take over from inside and begin to steer it incrementally towards this other path. And this guy who I was hanging out with shared with me his testimony finally about what this experience was like, because nobody in the church really took him in. And he was a young teenager at the time, and he wanted men to give him affirmation. He didn't have a dad. Well, this woman took great kindness to him, and she began to show him this left-hand path of magic. She began to reveal to him that she was the one who was running the roost here. She invited him and recruited him into the occult and began to train him in these spells and incantations, astral projection, and how to summon and send spirits. All of what is embraced by many people in the occult without their maybe realizing it for the black magic side, as they would call it. Same tree of knowledge of good and evil, left-hand magic and right-hand magic, but they were embracing it. And you know what? Those types of characters target individuals, and they go after them to harass them, to disrupt their sleep, to take away their peace. Like when you read about in Psalm 91, and it says, "You shall not fear the terror of the night." To a Hebrew, thousands of years ago, they would have understood he's talking about Lilith. It's not just some unnamed character. The terror of the night has been known and chronicled and documented as an entity that would haunt and torment people. Often a woman in a white gown with black hair, like you've seen in The Ring or some of these horror movies. But this one would visit people in the night and would cause them terror, would cause them dread. We call them nightmares, as this great horse that would sit on people's chests and terrorize them. Well, this is why he's warning us. Listen, Psalm 91 is written to specifically empower people to contend against these hierarchy of wicked ones. And he's teaching us the rules of engagement there and in Ephesians 6 and Psalm 119. There's these war verses, Psalm 37, that help us to know how to fight against them. But the terror of the night is what it sounds like in a lot of ways with sleep paralysis, like people are feeling that overwhelming, crippling dread. These words, panic, literally come from the Greek word for phobos or phobias. These were the deities of dread and fear that people have known about, these terrorizing spirits. We have been scientifically brainwashed. We've been dumbed down deliberately to not understand our reality. And this keeps us disabled from contending against these adversaries and knowing how to put up a fight. And that's why there's this fervent effectiveness that can rise up in us to contend against these things, to read the living scriptures, to understand our identity, and to be able to engage in the powers of the kingdom of heaven and contend with this radical, intelligent evil. And that's why I was sharing with you some about the prayers I put on my website. I have a prayer resources tab, and telling people, hey, you can ask the Father to forgive the sins that are empowering these evil spirits that have been sent on assignment against you and your family. You can ask him to forgive the sins that are empowering these individuals, corporately or collectively, to target you and your family. Ask the Father to forgive the generational sins, because you got to understand there's this darkness that these people do by continually doing evil. It fills up the battery bank with what's called iniquity. And that was what was found when you read Ezekiel 28, when you read this darkness that was found inside Hillel ben Shahar. People call him Lucifer. It's not his name. It's just a thing people put upon him. But when Yahweh examined him, it said iniquity was found in him. That's the birthplace of iniquity. And that's a different power bank that the enemy uses, because they don't have the holiness of our Creator. And that's what they have to recharge continually. And so as you see these gates of darkness opening up around us, as people engage in whatever incremental wickedness, if they're starting to touch into a Ouija board, or they're watching some of these movies that are using occult marketing to try to draw people in, they're opening these doors and they're gaining access into people's lives. But then there's this counterforce that is out there relentlessly, fervently fighting to expose that and contend against it. That's who the enemy is targeting right now. And he waits until he can ambush them successfully. And that's what so many people are experiencing right now.